nice and wet and moist in here. The water is in here, okay? Water, because of its property of high surface tension, water wants to form into a drop. Okay, that's why we have water drops. Because water, the hydrogen bonding between the hydrogens and oxygens on the water molecules attract each other. So much so that water will form drops. Now we know that water forms drops. That's water attracting itself to itself, the water molecules. If that happened, if the water lining the inner surface of the alveolus started to form drops, it would pull on the walls of the alveolus and shut the alveolus. As the water would try to form water drops. We don't want that. That will cause lung collapse. You do that in the alveoli, your entire lung will collapse. You will not be breathing with that lung. Okay? So, the cells here that make the alveoli secrete surfactant. Surfactant is like dish liquid. Okay? Surfactant is going to keep the water molecules from being able to come in contact with each other, disrupt their ability to interact with each other. So they won't be able to form a drop. And they won't pull inward on the walls of the alveoli and cause lung collapse. So surfactant in our lungs, extremely important. Okay? But we have the wall of the alveolus right up against the wall of the capillary, making that respiratory membrane so thin that oxygen can leave the alveolus and enter into the bloodstream and go enter into a red blood cell. And carbon dioxide that these red blood cells have brought to the lungs can leave the red blood cell, cross over the respiratory membrane and into the alveolus so that we can breathe that out. And that's gas exchange. Simplified. What time are we? 8:20? Yeah. Okay, let's keep it going. The lungs are our, where we are, have all of our alveoli, right? On the right side, 3 lobes. On the left side, 2 lobes. On the right side, the 3 lobes, it's gonna be so much fun when we have the model in front of us. The 3 lobes are divided by our, the horizontal fissure and an oblique fissure. On the left side, the 2 lobes are separated by an oblique fissure. At the left lobe, we have the cardiac notch in that lung that makes room for the heart to sit. Here we are. That's what it looks like a smoker's lung. We'll talk about it. Smoker's lung. But here we are. Here's the left lung, 2 lobes, the right lung, 3 lobes. The right lung's lobes are divided by the horizontal fissure and an oblique fissure runs at an angle. The left lung is divided, the 2 lobes divided just by an oblique fissure. The left lung has the cardiac notch that allows the heart that's been removed, the heart to sit here, has room to angle to the left the way it does. The lung has a root. It has a costal surface that gets in contact with the lungs. It has the apex, the tips of them. It has the base, the bottom of the lungs, and then the hilum is at the medial side of both lungs where the bronchi enter in. And the blood vessels leave and come in, and nerves enter. So here we are. The right lung, left lung, lobes and fissures. Taking in the medial view, there's the hilum. Where the bronchus enters, the veins enter, the arteries enter, the veins leave, nerves enter. This is what our model looks like. On our model, we're going to depict the hilum, right hilum, where we're having these are here, where we have the bronchus marcasite, that cardiac notch. Our fissures we'll be able to see. Basically 3 fissures, 2 fissures on the right. It doesn't really do a good job of making one horizontal and the other oblique. Just puts 2 of them there. But we're gonna call that one the oblique one, that one the horizontal one on the right. The base of the lungs, right there on top of the diaphragm, the major muscle for respiration. As the diaphragm contracts, it pulls down, it opens up the lungs. Okay? As it relaxes, it pushes up and pushes on the lungs. That helps us to inhale and exhale. The major muscle of respiration. Again, the lobes of the lungs are divided into the bronchopulmonary segments. Okay? And then those get further divided into the lobules. Again, if there's a bronchopulmonary segment that's diseased, it can be removed and the lungs will still work. The bronchopulmonary segments get further divided into lobules. Okay? The lobules are separated by connective tissue. This connective tissue is where you get a lot of particulates, or in the lobules, or the connective tissue will get a lot of particulates that deposit there from smoke. And that's what causes smokers' lungs to look black. It's the carbon that gets deposited there. Okay. Apex, base, and you can see the start taking bronchopulmonary segments and divide them into very small lobules. You can see them well here, the small lobules of the lung. We're gonna finish this. Okay, let's think about the blood supply to the lungs, because the lungs are involved in both pulmonary and bronchial circulation. That means the blood traveling between the heart and the lungs, pulmonary circulation, and then the blood supply to the lung tissue itself. The lungs get their own blood supply in order to service those cells, that tissue there. That's bronchial circulation. So we have the pulmonary arteries that are bringing in oxygenated blood to the lungs, well, actually deoxygenated blood, leaving the heart, bringing in deoxygenated blood in order to do gas exchange and pick up oxygen. Once that gas exchange happens, that oxygenated blood will enter into the pulmonary veins that will be carried back to the heart. And then the heart will send that out systemically. And part of this to the body. Part of that systemic circulation is bronchial circulation, where bronchial arteries will start to service the tissue of the lungs. Okay? And then bronchial veins will pick up that blood after it's finishing servicing the tissues of the lungs. Okay? And then deliver that used blood, the oxygenated blood, into pulmonary veins, okay, that are gonna head back to the heart. Okay? So, when it comes to the lungs, and we saw this before when we saw the serous membranes of the body cavities, one of our earlier lectures. The serous membrane here in the pleural cavity, where the lungs sit, is called the pleura. This is a serosa, secreting serous fluid. The pleura, which is that serosa, this membrane, has 2 layers. A parietal layer that lines the back wall of the backside of the thoracic cavity, that then folds back upon itself. The parietal pleura folds back upon itself and lines the surface of the lungs. And then it changes names from parietal pleura to visceral pleura. And that is the surface of the lung. And then there's a space in between these 2 layers of the pleura, between the parietal pleura layer and the visceral pleura layer. That space is the pleural cavity filled with serous fluid that reduces friction as the lungs are moving as we breathe. So here we are in the two pleural cavities. We have the parietal pleural lining the body wall, the backside of the body wall, that folds back upon itself and then lines the surface of the lungs as the visceral pleural. See that better here. Here's the pleura, the membrane that lines the backside of the body wall as the parietal pleura, and then folds back upon itself and lines the surface of the lungs as the visceral pleura, and it actually becomes the surface of the lung. Then we have the muscles that help us breathe. The diaphragm contracts and relaxes. Contracts to allow inhalation, pull air into the lungs. Relaxes to push the air out for exhalation. We have other muscles that help, that are accessory muscles to respiration. The external intercostals, remember those, remember them? The internal intercostals are helping. The external intercostals help to aid in inhalation by lifting up the ribs so the lungs can expand. The internal intercostals press on the lungs to help with exhalation. And then pectoralis minor helps with inspiration as well by lifting up the lungs. The major muscle of inspiration, though, is the diaphragm. And then the accessory muscles are pectoralis minor, and the internal and external intercostal muscles. If there are problems at the lungs, one could suffer from COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Okay? And this can occur due to chronic bronchitis, where there's an obstruction in the airways, or emphysema, where the alveoli have been destroyed. The walls of the alveoli are destroyed, and they can't function in gas exchange. Okay? This can happen if there's smoking, if there's this can lead to labored breathing, where you really are working hard and you really are relying on those accessory muscles to help lift the lungs or the ribs so you can breathe in. Okay. People who have a lot of labored breathing actually have very pronounced muscles, accessory muscles. If they work so hard, they get bulked up. Okay? When we look at an alveolus, here is a dysfunctional alveolus, or here are dysfunctional alveoli associated with emphysema. So it's not nice and round, but it's distorted. Okay? Asthma, okay, is hard to breathe, right? And this is due to inflammation of the airways. Okay, this inflammation can be an immune response, okay, that helps this inflammation kind of makes it hard to breathe. Okay, asthma. You can have tuberculosis, another dysfunction, right, caused by a bacterium. And then there's lung cancer. The lung cancer can be due to smoker's lung. So here are particulates that are trapped in the tissues of the lung. And here is smoker's lungs with cancer, where you have the tumorous growth on the lung. It's gonna be charcoal too.